No, I'll tell you when we're done. Let us start this session for today.
Okay.
I'm not sure if who else had said they're coming. Is it Tolu? I think it was Tolu. But she can join later. Okay, so welcome everyone to week 11 of our Webflow workshop session. This is the final month of our sessions. So our last session will be so this week 9/16 on the 23rd of May. That will be when our last session is. This month we are gonna be focusing more on you guys actually building a proper project. So not just one page. Well, it can be one page, or it can be, at least 2 or 3 pages, but like a proper website from scratch, beginning to end. And then hopefully you'll have, something that you can use, in your portfolio or when you're applying for jobs, blah blah blah. So this week we're actually covering Webflow SEO and performance optimization because I realized I didn't really go over that before, and this is an important part in building the website, the final things. And then next week we will. Well, I think this week we'll do the SEO and optimization, and I'll see how long that takes. And then I put here a note that once we're done with all of these items, we will start on the capstone. Oh, I call it capstone project, but just the final project that you can work on, and you can take as long as you want on it. But also, I think next week we might cover accessibility and just some accessibility considerations to keep in mind when building your website. Or we might do it today if we have time. And there's also a checklist that Webflow, I think they have a general project checklist actually that I'll share at some point during this call. So let us go back to our project here. So last time we covered forms, how to create a form, how to set up a form, how it works, and hopefully that was clear. So assuming that your website is complete and done and you've designed everything, you've built out the pages, today we're really covering, okay, what are those final key steps that you need to do before your project can be published, you know, or even how do you publish a project? That's something that we also haven't really covered yet. So the first point is SEO. So meta tags, open graph, alt text. SEO stands for search engine optimization. And basically, when you create a website and um, Google crawls the site, so it ends up on Google's page indexing, how much content you have on your site, how your content is structured, how your pages are structured, your site architecture, all these different things help improve or not improve your search engine, the search SEO for your website. So if your SEO is good, that means your website will appear on the front pages or like near the front pages of Google. So, when you look for something on Google, all those links that appear in the first page, some are ads, but some are because those websites have good SEO. And then if you don't have or you don't really put a lot of effort into your SEO, then your page would be, all the way in the back. So obviously every website, every client, every organization would want their website to appear first so people can click onto their website. So part of making a website is making sure that the project at least has the basics covered when it comes to SEO. And fortunately, Webflow makes it really easy to add in this data into your site. So in your project, if you go into pages here, you'll see that they're under settings. If you scroll down, there are SEO settings and then open graph settings. And then these other ones we won't use as much. These are custom code settings. I don't think we've actually covered because we didn't really do custom code. But if you were adding custom code to your site, this is kind of one location where you can add that in. So SEO settings is where we start, and you can see we have two fields, so a title tag and a meta description. Unfortunately, when you hover over this, Webflow gives you, well, kind of a brief description of what this is. So title tag just means the title of the page, and it gives you also the number of characters that the page should be, the title should be, and then meta description is a description of the page, and also gives you, a number of how many pages it should be. So if I Google sample. Or I think this is the best way to do it. Actually, I want to show a sample of what it looks like when you are sharing all this different information. So, for example, if I type in my website here, and you can see that it immediately shows the cover of my website, and also it should show. Let me try LinkedIn. It should also show the title and the description. Let me try LinkedIn. Okay, LinkedIn also only shows the. Okay, here we go. So there are a couple of sites where you can actually preview what your the preview links for your website look like, so that you can also change it or tweak it if you don't like how it looks before you publish. So this is just a random one I opened up. I think there are a ton of different options. So you just add in the URL for the page, and then it'll give you what it'll allow you to make some edits, but here it'll also let you preview what the preview looks like on actually on a lot of different platforms. So Discord, LinkedIn, Twitter, and then Facebook. But you can see here, for example, in the Discord one, there's an image, and then there's the title of the page and the description. So this is all part of SEO. And the title and the description is what Google uses to rank your website. So for example, if your website was ranking really well and in the title or in the description, if it mentioned, I don't know, sustainability and your website is about recycling, then that would help boost your website's ranking if people were looking up, sustainability or recycling or the environment. So what you put in your description or like in your title is pretty important. You want to make sure it's relevant to what your website is about, but also relevant to, what your audience might be looking for. So this is where you would add in that title and that description. Going down here, you can see here there are also open graph settings. So these are specifically, so open graph basically means this preview that we shared here. That's why it's also called open graph. So if for whatever reason you wanted your your SEO settings to be different from your open graph settings. So if you, for example, wanted your SEO settings to be more detailed or to have slightly different wording so that Google would, focus on certain keywords more, you can type all that here. And then here, let's say you wanted to go in a different direction in terms of what people would actually see when they, you know, search the link of your site. You could have different titles and different descriptions here. But a lot of the time people usually just use the same for both, which is why once you put in information here, Webflow does give you an option where you can check these two boxes. And so that'll make sure that the title and the description are the same as you had them here. So I can write here test title and then test description. And you can see it also gives me that preview and like the search results. This is what it would look like on Google and the Google results. And then down here, because I checked these two boxes, it's going to show me the same title and the same description. So I would recommend just keeping them the same, but you do have an option to make them different if you did want to. And then down here, you have an area where you can also add in the image. So that's this preview image that appears here. You'll notice that there's no like option to upload directly here. It's just a place to add in a URL. And you also see that they give you the dimensions for the image. So it's 1200 pixels by 630 pixels. So when you are creating that image, you can use that frame as a reference. But in terms of how to add that URL here, the easiest thing to do is, I can save these changes, to go into your assets here and then just add the image in your assets panel in Webflow. Once the image has been uploaded, you can then click the three dots on the image for the settings and you can click copy link. So now this image is in your Webflow assets library. So it's there. You can use it. You can actually use these image links for a lot of different things, but essentially you're referencing the image and you don't have to host it on another website. You can just host it in Webflow directly. So then I can just copy the link and then I can go back to my page and here I can paste the link. And then you can see here, even the preview is updated. So it'll show me, okay, this is the preview image that I wanted. So this is what it would look like if somebody was sharing this link to this specific page. Let me just emphasize, we are just editing these settings for this page. These are not settings that you apply to all pages at once. You edit them individually for each page. So that is how you would add in the image. The other thing I will briefly mention, because these are included here and I don't want it to be confusing, is, and you also, I don't know, maybe want to keep this in mind, there are also site search settings. This is not Google search, just to also make that clear. This is Webflow search, because Webflow does have a search capability. They have a search element that you can add to your sites. So if you look up search, you can see you can add search, and essentially it will search, allow users to search content on your entire website. But if you want a page, if you have this search feature implemented and you want a specific page to not appear in the results, in the page settings, there is an option to exclude. So you can check this box so that the page doesn't appear in the search results. But yeah, just to be clear, this is specifically for Webflow, the search feature in Webflow. This is not related to Google or anything like that. So you can make those adjustments if you want. It also has SEO, title tag and description tag and image. And right now it's just using the same as we did above, which is what you would normally want it to be. But if for some reason you wanted the Webflow search results to look different or to have different content, you can just uncheck this and then write in your own information, write your own description, and also change the image if you want. But most people just keep that the same as well. So like I said, we just did that for one page, which means if I go to the next page, you can see it's empty and I need to do the same thing again. So I need to add in my title tag, my description, add in my URL, etc., etc. A lot of the time for most websites, they normally keep the open graph image the same for almost all the pages on their website. So like for example, even my website, I think every page except the case study pages have different images, because you don't really need a custom image for each page as long as your main image kind of communicates what it is that you do. So for example, this image of mine, it communicates what I do. I create design solutions. It shows the webs, like some past websites or some past design work I've done. That's good enough for me, even that. So I don't really need a unique image for every single page. Sometimes clients do have unique images for different pages. So it's a matter of preference, but starting out, it's just something to keep in mind. You don't have to create a custom image for each page. You can just have one image that you use for your entire website, and then maybe use a couple of unique images here and there. One good example when people use unique images is for CMS collection pages, which I will jump into next. So we covered how to update the SEO settings for static pages. But now what about CMS settings? So for example, if I open blog posts as an example, and I grow up. So we can see here a lot of the content or the layout of how you update the settings is the same, but there are these new options here, add field. And this basically means you can, instead of typing in content, because keep in mind, when you click edit, you are editing the settings for all pages. There's no way to go in individually into like the CMS directly and edit the tag and description um, individual, kind of like how we did for static pages. Instead, then the way that you dynamically update title and description and images for CMS content is by using these reference fields. And I think we covered CMS. So it's kind of the same way as when you add a CMS collection to your page and you assign different things to the CMS collection. It populates according to, the different fields you create. So for example, for title tag, if I click add field, you can see these are the CMS fields I have in my collection. So I can choose whichever one I want to populate here. So for example, if I choose title, so now you can see it automatically populates and it lets you preview how it would look like for each CMS item. So this, for example, this text is about cooking. If I go next, the next one is about bread, eating practices, etc. So it lets you preview how it would look like for all the different CMS items you want. And that's because we dynamically, put the title as title. Whereas if you try to type in, something and then you flip through, you'll see it's the same for all of them because it's not getting that information dynamically from the CMS. So for CMS collections, you use reference fields so that it changes according to the CMS item. But you can also add, you know, extra content here that is going to remain the same for all of them. So a lot of the time, for example, with like blogs or, you know, webinars or like these kinds of CMS collections, people will have the name of the whatever, the title of the item. So, for example, this is like the blog title. And then they'll have this ending portion, which is like blog. Or if I wanted to be specific, foodie blog. So let's say foodie is the name of my brand. And the reason they do this is because they still want the brand to be associated or somehow linked with this page. Because if you can imagine, like if I didn't have this and this result popped up in Google, I mean, okay, healthy salad ideas, but like from who? It's important to add that context and also helps with ranking because it links your brand or your company or whatever it is to the content that you are creating. So this is kind of like the I don't know how you would say it, but like the signature of your website. So in other pages, you might have unique titles, unique whatever. In this case, you have the CMS titles populating, and then at the end, you kind of have that signature. So regardless of which CMS items I preview, it'll have that same signature because I've added it this way. Meta description will do the same thing. We'll link this to the post summary field. So now it will populate with the different summaries that are already in my CMS collection. If I go down, so we can see open graph, same thing as we did with the static pages. We're going to check this and check this so that it uses the same content. Now here in their image, you'll see that it's not an option to add a URL. In this case, you actually add the image from the CMS. So in the case of blog posts, usually that will just be the main image you already have in your blog post because that's usually like a field you already have in your blog, so you can use that. But for some unique CMS collections, you might not already have an image field, or the image field you have might not be the one that you want to use for the preview, which is fine. It just means that you can then go into your CMS. So if I save this, for example, go back into my CMS, and I can specifically add a new field called open graph image or meta image or SEO image, whatever it is that you want to call it. So I can create this new field for the specific reason of uploading what I want my preview image to be like for each individual CMS item. And then I can go back, if I save this field and save collection, and then I can go back and then instead of main image, I can link it to open graph image. Obviously, we didn't upload any images to those fields, so it's not going to show anything. But assuming that we did, it would then show those images instead. So there's no URL here, just keep that in mind, but you just upload those images through the CMS. You can actually do the same thing for title and summary. So in the case of blogs, it's convenient because usually the title and the summary you would have for a blog is what you would want to use in your preview or for SEO. But like, let's say it isn't, or let's say it's a different kind of collection, you can still go in and then create fields specifically for SEO. So I can create a new field for like SEO title. I can create a new field for SEO description as well, save it, and then I can go back and link those fields in my CMS. So the point is, as long as you have these fields in the CMS, you can link them in your SEO settings. So let's say this instead of title, I want to use SEO title. Instead of summary, I want to use, SEO description. So I can do that instead. So it's very flexible in terms of how you want to use it. The only other thing I want to highlight for the CMS content is publishing. So I don't think we covered this when we looked into CMS, but anytime you create a CMS collection, the collection page, so the page where the collection exists, is automatically published by default, which means technically if somebody wanted to, for example, I mean, for blog posts, it's already live. We want it live, so that's not an issue. But for blog authors, for example, if somebody wanted to type in this URL and navigate to this page, they could because the URL exists. It's published live by default. Even though if I go to the actual page itself, there's nothing on it because we don't have content we don't have a need for, you know, a page to exist for each individual blog author. We're using it as a reference field for the post, but the actual authors themselves don't need their own page. So usually it doesn't matter because I mean, even if somebody navigates to this page, like, they're not going to get anything from it. But if you specifically want to make sure that somebody cannot go to this page, like if they try to go to this page, they'll be redirected somewhere else or taken to an error page. You can go into your settings, and right here at the beginning, you'll see there's an option to turn this off. So if I turn this off, this basically means this page is not published. So if somebody for somehow manages to navigate to a specific blog author page, then they just won't be able to, the page will take them to an error page because the page no longer exists. But by default, all CMS collections pages are published, I believe. And then if you want to unpublish any, you can just go in and turn that off. I don't think it's a particularly big deal, but it's more something to keep in mind later on if you are, sometimes a lot of clients will like launch with a specific kind of content and then later on they want to, let's say, put the blog on hold and hide it. So when you are hiding the blog or hiding any kind of collection, just make sure that you also unpublish it here. So you just turn that off and then you can click save, and that's pretty much it. So I think those are the key things that are related to SEO tools. um any questions before we move on to, I think we can actually do accessibility and then page speed and stuff. Oops. Mm. Okay. If we are good, then we will move on to our second point, which is okay, now let's say your SEO for your pages are done. You've set it up. Great job. The next step is, well, one of the next steps, obviously, I'm not doing this in order, but another thing that you also want to keep in mind is accessibility. Accessibility meaning all users, regardless of their capabilities or their inability to do something, should be able to use your site. So if somebody has sight issues, or if they have hearing issues, or if they're deaf, whatever the condition it is that they're in, they should ideally be able to use your website and navigate through your website just as well as any other user. So accessibility is something important to consider when you are working on a website, because if your website is accessible, then you are allowing more users to use it. Whereas if it's inaccessible, then you are limiting it to only users of a specific nature, which isn't really how we should be thinking as user experience or as user interface designers. That's why user experience or UX is a pretty big thing, because a website isn't just about making things look flashy or interesting, but it's also about making sure that the website can be used by everybody. So the great thing about Webflow is that, because accessibility is a big topic and there's a lot you can learn about web development, web accessibility essentially. And I would encourage you to do your research and look into that. But Webflow is also a great starting point because it gives you some of the basic tools in understanding how accessibility works. One of those tools is the Webflow audit system. So in your Webflow project, if you go down to the bottom left here, you'll see there's this button called audits. And when you click on that, it gives you audits for the page. So anyone who's done UX before, audit is a very familiar term to you. It essentially goes through all your different pages and lets you know on an accessibility or performance, but also mostly accessibility point of view, what things could you improve on your page? Now, none of these things that Webflow highlights are like major issues. None of them are going to make your site crash or anything like that. It's not for major issues. These are purely issues that a Webflow is highlighting from an accessibility point of view. So for example, on this page, it's highlighted one error for me, which is missing alt text that I'll go back to, but it also has given me four areas that I've actually passed in. So maybe I had these errors before and I fixed them, etc. Whatever it is. So when you click on it, it actually gives you more info on what this means. So like, what does this mean? What does skipped heading level mean? What does duplicate ID mean? But also even for the ones that are still wrong that I need to fix, it does give you a description of like what it is that is wrong. And also, a lot of the time, it'll link you directly to where the mistake is, which makes it easy. Because if you have a big website with a ton of things, it can be very difficult to find where the error is. So normally with the error section, you can actually click into this to find where the error is. So for example, this error in this case is missing alt text. What is alt text? Alt text is stands for just alternative text that you add to an image that gives context to what the image is. So if somebody is unable to see the image because of their disability, they can still get contextual understanding of what the image is. So in this case, I can see it's an image of a girl. And I'm assuming this content here was related to this, I would understand. Okay, let's say this is a website about a community for women or like, a feminist initiative. The image makes sense in that context. So I see the image, I see the text, I understand, etc. Now, if I can imagine somebody can't see the image, if there was alt text applied, they would instead hear a description of the image to give them the additional context. So in this case, it could be like an image of a young girl staring off into the distance. You know, how much content you should provide for alt text. Um, my frame of understanding is that you should provide as much context as necessary. So you don't have to mention every single detail. So if you don't have to say, for example, in this image, it doesn't make sense for me to say, oh, she was wearing a blue shirt, she is standing in front of a washing machine, there's like a yellow jacket behind her, she has brown hair. Like all those are details about the image, but they're not really relevant to what the image is communicating, so I don't need them. The point of the alt text is to provide key information that would help a user understand, okay, this is the text and this is what this image is telling me. Now I can move forward. So where do you add this alt text? So if you click into the settings for this image and enter the settings panel, we can see here, there's width, there's height, and then here there's an option for alt text. Actually, if you also click settings here, it'll appear, or you can go to show all settings and it'll appear here. So it appears in both places. So under alt text, it's by default set to use alt text from assets. So 99% of the time, you will have to change that. So instead of use alt text from assets, you can either choose decorative or custom description. Custom description is when you can then go in and write a custom description for this image. Decorative is when you click that to basically, and Webflow actually gives you context what this means. A decorative image has no semantic meaning or has limited information value. So for example, a lot of the time, like let's say you upload a pattern in the background. It's an image file, but it's just a pattern you're using in the background for, aesthetic reasons. There's no meaning to it, right? It's just to make the design look better. But because it is an image, you are still prompted to add alt text. Like Webflow will flag that image as needing alt text. But you can't really add alt text because that image has no meaning and you don't want the user to hear, oh, this is a pattern of three dots that I'm put in the background for, visual, for design reason. Like it doesn't make sense to communicate that to the user. It has no importance in that regard. So there is an option for those kinds of images where instead of giving them a custom description, you can just say they're decorative. That basically means the image is there for decoration, but it doesn't have any important meaning that you need to communicate for users who, need the alt text. In this case, this image is important. We're assuming, like obviously this is just a sample site with a bunch of random content, but assuming with this image is important, we will go in and add a custom description. So we can say a young girl, um, oops. We're gonna say younger staring up to the distance calmly. It's hard to really describe this image because naturally when you're describing images, there's like textual content there as a reference. So it gives you that, added context of like, okay, what should I highlight about this image? But because this is just a random image, I just described what was in the image. But notice I didn't make it too long. The thing to keep in mind with alt text is that people who need alt text, well, alt text is important for everyone because also if an image doesn't load, usually the alt text will appear. But if you're imagining somebody listening to the alt text using a screen reader, don't want them to listening to paragraphs. So keep it pretty short, but make sure that you're just communicating the important value of the image. So now that we actually updated the alt text of that image, if I go back to my audit panel, you can see here that there are no more issues because that was the last issue that Webflow wanted me to highlight. So now let's say if we go to another page, like let's say we go to week 3. Week 3 doesn't have much on it, so we have no issues, which is great. Let's go to week 4. Week 4 has a few issues, so let's open this up. Okay, and we have a new issue here, non-descriptive link content. So link content conveys a link's purpose, what it is and where it leads. Links should have text content or an image with alt text. So it's telling me that I have links on the page, but there's no clear indication of like, what is this link for? Where does this link lead? Once again, if you, for example, don't have a disability, you might think, well, it's obvious where this link leads. So for example, it's plugged blog item, which is essentially this link wrapper we've used for a blog item. I obviously can see hovering over this, there's a link that appears. If I click this, it'll take me to a blog post. But if you can imagine somebody that, let's say, has a sight disability, they might not be able to understand that because they don't have that visual reference. So that's why Webflow is highlighting that you need to make it clear that number one, there's a link here, but also number two, where does this link go? Like if the person clicks on this section on the page, where will it take them? So with that kind of error, if I go back, the easiest way that I have found to add that context is Overflow mentions that you can add an image or a text that links, but I found that the easiest way to add that link context is to use ARIA labels. Now, ARIA labels are kind of getting a bit too deep into accessibility. Actually, not too deep into accessibility, but deep for what we are doing today. Um, we're not going to be diving into all the details, but it's something that I would encourage you to do research in because it's not too complicated and it is pretty important. You use it a lot for accessibility reasons. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it like pretty straightforward. So under settings, so I've selected my link, and here under settings, at the bottom, there's custom attributes, and this is where you add your ARIA label. So ARIA label just gives an indication of what this is, like what is it? So it can be anything, but it gives that added descriptive content of like, what is this element? And that information is then shared with, somebody using a screen reader or using a technology device to help them navigate the page. So to add it, I would just, for the name, put ARIA label. And then for the value, I could say anything. I could say blog post. I could say blog link. Just basically, what is this link for? That's what you're communicating. And now that I've added that, I can see, okay, the first one went away. Now there's just one more area for the blog links at the bottom where I need to add in those ARIA labels. So I add that in, and then it tells me issue resolved, and then we have no more issues. So you can use the Webflow audit panel to go through all of these different accessibility considerations. Webflow does provide, context on each one, and it also provides links. If you don't understand any of them, like, okay, what does it mean skipped heading level? And you want more information, you can actually click these links to learn more. So you can figure it out and understand what all of them mean. But the key thing to remember is your website is not finished until you clear all these items. And even then, there's more you can do to make your website more accessible. So this is not the maximum. Once you clear this, I would say it's the minimum, but there is more that you can do to make your website more accessible. And Webflow even has links here where you can understand how to practice accessibility more in your website. The last thing I want to highlight for accessibility is the checklist. So Webflow actually does provide a checklist for accessibility, and it covers honestly a lot, but also not everything. So you could do more than what is provided here. But it's a good starting point, and you can use this for every project. And it has different categories. So, for example, animation. Avoid excessive motion behind text. And when you actually click into this, it does give you more of a description of like why, like why is this important, why should I do this, and then if you click the links it gives you even more info. So there's a lot of information regarding accessibility to help you understand what to do. And so you can use this for every project, and once a project is done you can clear and then use it again for a new project. So as you select, it tells you the progress of making your website accessible. you know Appearance, from code as well, if you're using custom code, for color, content, controls, like it's a pretty good list. So I think as a starting point, it's a really good idea to use a list like this to at least make sure that you are thinking about these accessibility concerns. It's just as important as anything else when you are creating a website. So that was about accessibility, more of like a brief introduction. And then we have like around 15 minutes. So I think that we can also cover do page speed optimization, and then publishing and hosting consideration. And then I'll hopefully have time to like briefly introduce, well, briefly explain what the final project should be. So moving on to page speed optimization, which is lazy loading, image compression, etc. I also consider these also as like final tasks you do as you're preparing to launch a website. So, as I'm sure if you have experience with creating websites, you know page speed is one of the key things to keep in mind because you want to make sure that your website doesn't crash or doesn't take too long to load. If somebody loads your website, it loads within a reasonable amount of time. And I don't mean if they have poor internet or anything like that. Just by default, it should load within a certain amount of time. And there are actually page tools or website tools you can use to measure the performance of your website. So I'll show those briefly, but to start off with, one of the ways you can improve, your page speed is lazy loading. What is lazy loading? Lazy loading just basically means for your images on your page and also video content too, but we'll do images for now. For images on a page, by default, they load lazy. What does they load lazy means? It means that it loads on scroll. So the image loads on scroll, which is what you want normally for any visual content. So as the user is scrolling across the page, the image will load. That's why sometimes you find that you load a page and like, okay, the first page, the images on the page appear. And then as you scroll, the other images are loading in. So they're still loading in if your internet is slow, whatever. And that's because it's using lazy load. So it's not that every single image loads when you refresh a website or go to a website, but rather as the user scrolls, those images load. This is the optimal choice to have for it for I mean page speed, because it means that you're not forcing the internet to load every single image on the page. You're only forcing it to load maybe the first few images that appear, and then as the user scrolls, it loads the other images. The few occasions in which you might want to use the other ones is, well, in particular, eager is for those first images that you have on the page in the hero section. So for example, this is my hero section. Let's assume I have like content below here, blah, blah, blah. This is my hero section, meaning that when I load the website, this is the first section that I see before I even scroll. This is the image that I actually want to load as I'm loading the website, because I don't want the website to have loaded and then this image isn't here. You don't want to have the user to have that experience. You want to make sure the first image they see on the page is loaded when the page is loaded. So if you want to do that, you would select your image. And then here under type of image, instead of lazy, you would choose eager. So eager means it loads with the page, which means if I load my page, whichever image I've applied eager to will load alongside the page. So when the page is done loading, the image is done loading. Now, as I said before, you don't want to apply that to every single image, because if you have a website, so for example, if I go to my website, I have a lot of images, right? Like there are a ton of images on this page. So it would be very difficult for me to apply eager to every single one of these images, because then the page will take a very long time to load. Like it's a lot of images. However, I only need to apply eager loading to this image and this image, because these are the first images the user sees when they open my website. So therefore, these are the only images that need to load with the website. Every single other image can load as I scroll, and that's fine. So that's the difference between lazy and eager. And this is, like I mentioned, for images. And then you can also apply this for videos as well. The second thing we want to consider is image compression, which is also another big one. So in our assets panel, you will upload various assets and images as you create your website. And first of all, before I even go into image compression, there are actually ideal image formats to use in websites. So it's not PNG and it's not JPEG, because usually those image files are too big, but there are two other image files that are recommended, known as WebP, which you might have already encountered by yourself. And then also, is it AVIF or Avid? Which one is it? I always forget. AVIF, AVIF files. So those are the two image files that are recommended because they are much smaller in size. So
it is recommended to use those types of images. Now, obviously, a lot of the time when we are working with images in design, etc., it's going to be PNG or JPEG. And it's actually okay to upload PNG and JPEG files in your assets file. You don't have to convert first and then upload. Why? Because Webflow has an optimization tool built into it natively. So it'll optimize those images for you. So you can build your website, complete it, and then when you're now ready to optimize the images, it's very easy to do so. So for example, right now I have these three images. Two are PNG and one is JPEG, and I want to optimize all three of them to WebP, right? So another thing is actually if you click this arrow, it will open up the assets file more. So if you have a lot of assets, it's a good thing to do so you can see more of them. And then also lets you see the type of assets a lot easier. So in this case, right, I want to, first of all, you can click the select and you can select all assets. If you have a lot, that might be an easy way to do it. But then you also need to go in and intentionally select. Oh, actually, this is different. Before, you had to manually unselect SVG files because Webflow cannot compress SVG files. They're already really small. You're not supposed to compress them. So you would have to actually manually go in and unselect those before you could click compress. But I'm seeing that they've actually made some changes here. So you can select everything and Webflow will only compress the files that it can actually compress. So that's actually pretty good. So you can see here it recommends Aviv. I normally do WebP. I don't think there's a big difference as far as I know, but I haven't done much research into that. But whichever option you want is fine. So you can, for example, select WebP and then you can select compress. And then Webflow will let you know that it is compressing the images, and when it's done, it'll give you a notification that it's done. So now you can see here, the format of my images is all WebP. So before it was PNG and JPEG, but now it's just WebP, 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 WebP. And like we said, you can't compress SVG files, so those remain the same. So that was actually pretty quick because we only had, 4 images. But if you had like a ton of images, it would take a bit of time. Well, not a long time, but just a bit of time. But the good thing is you don't have to wait. You're not stuck waiting. You can actually go on and continue working on your website. And then when the images are ready, it'll give you that notification that you are done compressing. I forgot to do this actually before I compress them, but you can actually go into your settings, edit settings, and you can actually see how big your image files are. This is a good way of just seeing, for example, if your page load time is really low and you want to identify, okay, is there an image that's too big? This is a good way of going in to see, okay, which image of mine is maybe taking up too much space. So in this case, because I just compressed this, it's actually really small. So how you know when an image is too big? I will say anything 1 MB or higher is pretty big for a website. If it's just the one image, probably not a big deal. If you have like 50 plus images on your page and they're all 1 MB or bigger, your page is gonna take a bit of time to load. So you want to try and make sure that your images are below 1 MB. So for example, this is 200 KB, which is great. 1000 KB equals 1 MB, by the way, if that wasn't clear. So this is 200 KB, which is like way below 1 MB or 1000 KB. So that's great. If I go into my next image, for example, this one, you can see this is 2.2 KB. Like that's barely anything. That's exactly what we want. If I go into this image, for example, edit settings, that's 52. So these are all like super small, which is great. And obviously we just compressed them, so that made them even smaller. But we can see that, okay, this is great. Webflow will actually normally even highlight files that are too heavy. I think it usually does it here in the settings panel. So like, for example, if I click this and open the settings, if an image is like, I think it's usually like above 700 KB or maybe above 500 KB or something like that, they'll actually mark it in red and let you know, hey, this image is kind of big. You might want to compress it. So it does give you that note as well. So that's about image compression and image formats. One more thing, you can also do this with CMS images, which is great. Last year, that wasn't a thing. So not too long ago, they actually made this update. So once you are done with your CMS collections and uploading everything, and let's say, like I said before, normally probably any image you had here will be like PNG or JPEG because that's what we're used to. So you don't have to manually go in, convert, and then change all these images. You can actually go into these settings here, and there's an option to compress assets. And then you can select, yeah, WebP, etc. And then it'll tell you, hey, we're compressing your assets. And then, well, it did that pretty quickly because I don't have that many, but you can keep on working until it's ready. So now that it's done, I think it actually, yes, once its assets are compressed, it actually also uploads them to your assets panel too. So all these blog images are now here. But also at the same time, if I go into my blog, I can see that all these images are now WebP because they've been compressed to WebP. So that's a really cool thing as well. So that's just about how to improve page speed. I mentioned that I would share a tool for measuring page speed. So the one that I think a lot of people use, there are quite a few options, is Page Speed Insights. And this is the link for it, pagespeed.web.dev. So what you do is you just copy the URL of your website and then you type it in here and you click analyze. And then it takes a bit of time to analyze, but it gives you reports on mobile and desktop. The one thing I will say about these page speed tools is that they're good reference, but don't use what they say as the final word, you know. So if you get like a not so great score, obviously look into how you can improve some things. You can't improve everything, right? But you can see what you can improve, but don't feel like, oh, because I got this score, the website is going to not perform well. Like the website will be fine for the most part, but you can see what you can work on. But the point is, it's good to use multiple sources because just using one source doesn't always give you the actual truth. So for example, I could use page speed and I could use like one or two other websites and compare what scores they give me. And then if I see that all of them are giving me a similar score, for example, for SEO, then I know, okay, maybe I need to, look into my SEO. But so, for example, this is the report it's given me for Elsa Amri. So you can see here that best practices in SEO are good, 196, and then accessibility and performance are pretty low. So as you scroll down, it'll give you an indication of like for each category, what exactly is making the score low. Now, for performance and accessibility, well, mostly performance, it can be pretty tricky to figure out ways to improve because sometimes certain things are beyond your control, like anything related to custom code or, that kind of thing. There's not much you can do, but you can browse through this. It's called the diagnostics. You can browse through this list and see, okay, is there anything that's mentioned that I can actually do? So, for example, it's telling me, for example, this image is um largest contentful paint element. This is the largest contentful element painted within the viewport. And this is giving me a pretty big, like it's using up a lot of resources to load. So I can actually choose to learn more about, okay, what is this image? Why is it giving me this error? Do I need to remove this image? Do I need to compress this image? So, it's giving me, that context. If I go down further, properly size images. So sometimes a lot of times images you upload in Webflow, you don't give them a fixed size, you know, sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. So usually it'll highlight those images. But once again, these are not big issues. So it doesn't mean I have to now go in and make all these changes. While you are looking at these reports, you can also actually test the website on different platforms for yourself and see, does it work properly? Does it not? But you can kind of browse through this is telling me what I mentioned before. It's better to use WebP and Avi for images. It's identified one place where I used PNG instead. So I can just make note of that and then go and update that image. And then this error would go away. If we go down, it gives me my report on accessibility. So, for example, input buttons don't have discernible text. This is the text error that I was mentioning before. Same thing with links. It's highlighted my logo link. It isn't clear what this link is for, so I need to go in and add an area label to make it clear that, okay, this is a link to take the user back to the home page. If I go down, and then it also gives you like contrast. So for example, like maybe your colors don't have enough contrast, so it's hard to see. And then as I go down, you can see 100 for SEO. So I don't need to do anything for SEO. Or best practices, it'll identify things that I can improve. So this is mobile. If I go into desktop, it'll also give me a report. You'll see now desktop is a much better report than mobile. Usually that's also be the case, which is why you should probably look at the desktop report because that'll give you more of a realistic breakdown of like things you can actually improve. So in this case, my performance is pretty good. Like maybe there are a few things I could change, but for the most part, it's good. And then for accessibility, these are all things that I can change. A matter of changing them. So it's good to use tools like this to measure your website, and this does not go through the whole website. This only goes to the page. So if I wanted to, let's say, go through my about page, I would need to, I think it's called about. or what did I call it? Yeah, it's called about. I would need to actually put in the link to the about, analyze it again, and then go through that. If you have a page that is website that has a ton of pages, maybe you don't want to do this. There might actually be another tool that will go through all the pages on your website. I don't know what that is yet, so I can't recommend that. But I usually use this for like the homepage because I think the homepage also has the most amount of content. If your homepage is good to go, then your other pages are probably good to go as well. So here I can see my report for the about page. Obviously, my performance on mobile for whatever reason is like not great. Might be because of this image actually. And then if I go to desktop, I can see it's pretty good. It's just accessibility that I need to go in and make some changes. So um, that's pretty much everything. The only thing that we did not cover today is publishing and hosting, but we can actually do that at the start of the next section next week and then introduce the topic. So I'll actually introduce the topic today because um, maybe it'll also allow people to think about what they want to create. So the idea is these final 4 weeks is to now start working on an actual project that you can use in your portfolio or in anything else in the future. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can say, I want to just build one page or I want to build 2 to 3 pages. It's totally up to you. But the idea is to build the page, implement the lessons we have learned. So style guide, components, what else? Accessibility, SEO, client first. So how do you name your layers? All these different things that we have learned, you use that in the project that you create. And we're going to get up to until the point where you are now publishing the project. So essentially beginning to end, what method do you use in building your project? And the idea is by the time this workshop is done, you hopefully have the project ready or it's in a good place. But even after the workshop series is over, I'm still here to help if you need support on that project that you create. So next week we will briefly cover publishing and hosting. And then anything else that I've missed. I think I also want to share a checklist you can use for Webflow projects because sometimes it's hard to remember everything. I use a checklist for all my websites because it's very easy to forget. So I'll probably share a checklist that you can use when you are building websites, and then any other of these small things. And then for the actual project, I will also build something so that as I'm building, I can explain what I'm doing. We can review things as we're going along. And so we'll do that for the next 3 weeks. But otherwise, for today, we will end here. Um, I will stop sharing my screen. Oh, how do I stop sharing? There we go. Do we have any questions, Doreen? Do you have any questions? Since you're the
Nor nor said if have any question.
No question. Okay, if anyone has questions and they're watching this recording, just send me an email or text me on WhatsApp and I can help. But otherwise, I'll see you next week. And yep, let me stop recording here.